Picture the world's most stunning waiting room. Mountains that pierce clouds, fjords carved by ancient glaciers, and beaches where penguins waddle past surfers. This is New Zealand, and something strange is happening. Here's a country with everything going for it. 5.3 million people enjoying stellar education, rock-solid governance, universal health care. Yet the locals are leaving in droves. We're talking about an exodus that would make sense for a war zone, not a place that regularly tops those best countries to live lists. Let's talk numbers, because they're genuinely shocking. More than 600,000 New Zealand-born citizens currently live in Australia. That's over 10% of the entire Kiwi population next door. To put this in perspective, New Zealand loses about 50,000 people annually to permanent emigration, from a population smaller than Sydney's. Young professionals aren't just leaving, they're practically racing each other to the airport. And here's the kicker: 70% of them are heading to exactly one place: Australia. Distance shapes destiny, and New Zealand sits 2,000 kilometers from its nearest major neighbor, floating like a beautiful but forgotten island in the Pacific. This isolation creates a brutal economic reality. While Singapore became Asia's financial hub and Sydney dominates regional banking, Auckland watches from the sidelines, too far from global action to matter, but too close to Australia to develop its own pull. Think about it. Why would any company choose Auckland over Sydney? Manufacturing can't compete with Asia's proximity to both suppliers and markets. Tech startups struggle with time zones that miss both Silicon Valley mornings and London evenings. Banks and financial firms naturally gravitate to Sydney, where the currency carries more weight internationally, and you're plugged into bigger networks. Even if someone specifically wanted to do business in this region, everything you can do from Auckland, you can do from Sydney, but not vice versa. Agriculture stands as the exception, and what an exception it is. New Zealand transformed farming into high-tech precision operations, where satellites guide tractors and algorithms optimize milk production. The country produces enough food for 40 million people, 8 times its population. Being in the Southern Hemisphere means harvesting when northern markets desperately need fresh produce, commanding prices that justify those shipping costs. But here's the thing: modern farms don't need many workers. All that agricultural excellence creates wealth, but not jobs, especially not the kind that appeal to graduates who spent 4 years studying, not to end up on a farm. Now we hit the real problem, and honestly, it's almost absurd. Half of New Zealand's entire economic output revolves around property. Not building things, not creating services, not innovating. Just the endless cycle of buying, selling, financing, and regulating houses. When your economy becomes a giant property trading scheme, you get predictable results. Some of the planet's most unaffordable housing in a country that's mostly empty space. The median house price in Auckland recently hit 1.15 million New Zealand dollars. That's about 12 times the median household income. In a normal market, that ratio should be around 3 to 5. The government tried to fix this by banning foreign buyers in 2018. Sounds good, right? Except foreign purchasers only made up 3% of the market. And here's the real joke. The ban specifically excluded Australians, who were doing most of the foreign buying anyway. See, wealthy Australians treat New Zealand real estate like their personal vacation shopping mall. Queenstown lakefront property? Perfect for skiing holidays. Auckland apartment? Great for the kids when they study there. The irony is painful to watch. Young Kiwis can't afford houses, so they leave for Australia. Meanwhile, cashed-up Australian baby boomers buy those same houses, driving prices higher. These aren't immigrants coming to work and contribute. They're retirees seeking views and investors seeking returns. They pump money into property, not productivity. Let's be honest about why this keeps happening. Stamp duty. In Australia, you pay roughly 3% tax up front when buying property. New Zealand? 0. When Sydney houses regularly sell for 2 to 3 million Australian dollars, saving that 3% starts looking very attractive. Plus, no capital gains tax on investment properties held longer than 2 years. For Australian investors, it's like Christmas came early. New Zealand's attempts to cool its property market get undermined by refugees from Australia's even crazier real estate market. The relationship between Australia and New Zealand works like the EU, just without the bureaucracy. Actually, it's even easier. Kiwis can wake up in Wellington, fly to Melbourne, and start working that afternoon. No visa applications, no permits, no questions. This sounds great until you realize it means nothing stops your best and brightest from leaving. Take education as an example. Australian universities actively recruit New Zealanders, treating them like locals for tuition and loans. The 8 major Australian universities collectively enroll over 15,000 Kiwi students annually. After graduation, about 80% stay in Australia. Why would they go back? Australia offers more specialized positions, salaries that are 30 to 40% higher on average, and career paths that simply don't exist in smaller New Zealand cities. But let's be clear, this isn't just about money. It's about opportunity. A marine biologist in New Zealand might study the same handful of species their entire career. In Australia, they're working on the Great Barrier Reef with teams from around the world. An AI researcher in Auckland often works alone. In Sydney, they're part of teams tackling problems that actually matter globally. Bigger cities mean bigger opportunities, and ambitious people rarely settle for less. Cultural integration happens seamlessly, perhaps too seamlessly. A New Zealander in Australia faces none of the friction that typically slows migration. No language barriers, no cultural confusion, no subtle discrimination, just a slightly different accent that Australians find endearing. This ease of transition removes the final barrier that might keep talent home, the fear of not fitting in. New Zealand's response to this workforce hemorrhage? Import replacements. The country brings in about 130,000 immigrants annually, proportionally one of the highest rates in the developed world. But here's the dark comedy. Many of these imports eventually leave for Australia too. Recent data shows that within 5 years, about 25% of new immigrants to New Zealand have moved on, mostly to Australia. The country has become an expensive transit lounge, where people pause just long enough to get that valuable New Zealand passport before continuing to their real destination, Sydney or Melbourne. First-generation immigrants lack the emotional anchors that might keep native Kiwis home. No childhood memories of South Island skiing. No family farms passed through generations. No school friends to grab beer with on Friday nights. For them, New Zealand citizenship isn't a destination, but a document, one that unlocks Australia without the hassle of Australia's stricter immigration policies. This creates a cascade of complications. Integration becomes harder when communities constantly churn. Skill development suffers when experienced workers perpetually train newcomers who'll soon leave. Even basic social cohesion strains under the weight of constant turnover. The country risks becoming a nation of strangers, all waiting for their chance to leave. Some Kiwis do return, usually in their 40s or 50s, carrying Australian savings and skills. These boomerang migrants inject capital back into the economy, starting businesses and buying houses, further inflating those prices, ironically. The optimists point to this as proof the system works. New Zealand exports raw talent and imports polished professionals. But let's look at the actual numbers. For every skilled professional who returns at 45 with savings, 3 leave at 25 and never come back. The average returning Kiwi spent 12 years in Australia. They're coming home to retire or semi-retire, not to build careers. They're consumers more than producers, spending Australian superannuation rather than generating New Zealand wealth. It's nice they're coming home, but it doesn't fix the fundamental problem. Remittances help a bit. Young Kiwis in Australia send about 1.5 billion New Zealand dollars home annually, supporting families and sometimes funding small businesses. But let's be real, remittances are economic band-aids. They make things slightly less bad without fixing anything. No country ever built lasting prosperity on money its children earned somewhere else. The obvious solution seems simple. End the free movement deal with Australia. Make it harder for Kiwis to leave, harder for Australians to buy property. But here's why that's never happening. Those 600,000 Kiwis living in Australia, they vote. Add their families and friends still in New Zealand, and you're talking about a voting bloc that could swing any election. No politician is touching this with a 10-foot pole. Then there's the relationship itself. Australia and New Zealand aren't just neighbors, they're genuinely the friendliest countries on Earth. They share defense agreements, ANZAC, trade deals worth 30 billion New Zealand dollars annually, and send emergency workers to help each other during disasters. During Australia's 2020 bushfires, New Zealand sent firefighters without anyone filling out a visa form. That kind of cooperation doesn't happen if you start building walls. The economics seal the deal. Despite the brain drain, the open border generates about 2.5 billion New Zealand dollars in tourism annually. Australian companies employ 500,000 New Zealanders across both countries. Trans-Tasman business is so integrated that many companies don't even distinguish between their Australian and New Zealand operations. Closing the border would be economic suicide. The cure really would kill the patient. Here's the fundamental problem. New Zealand's biggest selling point, being absolutely stunning, is also its trap. The same pristine beauty that attracts billionaire doomsday preppers and Australian retirees doesn't pay the bills for young professionals. You can't eat scenery. You can't build a tech career on mountain views. Instagram likes don't pay mortgages. Think about who thrives in New Zealand versus who leaves. The country's perfect for people who already have money: retirees, remote workers, lifestyle migrants. But if you're 25 and ambitious, you're competing in a tiny market where half the economy revolves around selling houses to each other. No wonder they leave. Even the success stories come with asterisks. The film industry, turbocharged by Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, depends heavily on foreign productions chasing tax breaks. Currently, a 20% rebate that could disappear with any budget crisis. Tech companies that do emerge, like Zero or Rocket Lab, often end up listing on foreign stock exchanges and moving key operations overseas. The pattern never changes. New Zealand creates, the world extracts. So, what's the fix? First, acknowledge the uncomfortable truth. New Zealand needs industries that can only exist there, not just industries that happen to be there. Marine research using their unique ocean territory. Renewable energy from all that wind and hydro. They're already 82% renewable, why not export the expertise? Specialized agriculture that literally can't be replicated elsewhere. These create jobs that can't be moved to Sydney, no matter how easy the visa process is. The government has ammunition for change. Debt is only 35% of GDP compared to Australia's 42% or the UK's 98%. They could afford to be bold. But bold means making choices that hurt. It means accepting lower property values to help young buyers, angering every boomer who treats their house like a retirement fund. It means building cities up instead of out, embracing the density that makes Kiwis nervous. It means treating homes as places to live, not investment vehicles. The skills shortage needs radical solutions, not more working groups and reports. Why not actually pay doctors more than Australia? Sounds crazy, but losing them costs more. Offer equity stakes to tech workers, make them owners, not employees. Forgive student loans for graduates who stay 10 years. Yes, it's expensive, but you know what's more expensive? Training engineers for Australia. Here's an idea nobody wants to hear. Maybe New Zealand should get comfortable being smaller, but better. Not every country needs to be a growth machine. With climate change making the world less stable, being a beautiful, peaceful, sustainable country with a smaller but happy population might not be the worst outcome. But that's a choice that needs to be made deliberately, not stumbled into while your youth emigrate. The world is watching this experiment. Climate change will create millions of refugees seeking exactly what New Zealand offers: safety, stability, distance from chaos. The country could position itself as humanity's lifeboat, but only if it has a functioning economy and society when that moment comes. Or it could become a cautionary tale about what happens when paradise becomes a place young people visit but don't stay. Time is the enemy here. Every year, another 50,000 young Kiwis establish roots in Australia. Careers, mortgages, kids in school. Every year, those connections to home weaken. Every year, the cycle becomes harder to break. In 2015, net migration to Australia was 30,000. By 2023, it hit 45,000. The trend line is clear, and it's not good. The question isn't whether New Zealand can reverse this tide. With enough political will and economic sacrifice, anything's possible. The question is whether they want it badly enough to pay the price. Because right now, They're choosing the path of least resistance, letting young talent leave, replacing them with temporary workers, selling houses to foreign retirees, and hoping somehow it all works out. The clock is ticking. Every plane that leaves Auckland Airport carries more of New Zealand's future to Australia. And paradise, it turns out, doesn't mean much if there's nobody left to enjoy it except tourists and retirees. The choice is simple. Fight like hell for renewal, or accept a gentle decline into becoming the world's most beautiful retirement village. Either way, decide soon. Because doing nothing is still a choice, and it's the one New Zealand has been making for far too long.